Hi, my name's Chad Faber, and I'm Associate Director of Admission at Northwestern University, and also the Director of the Siegel Visitor Center, where Quinton and I are sitting at today. We want to take some time today to talk to you, both parents and guardians and students and counselors, about Financial Aid 101, as we'll call it. And we want to try and break through some of the vocabulary and jargon that can be a barrier to understanding it, and talk families and students through a little bit about what it is like to pay for and finance an education for college. So a little bit of background. As I said before, I'm an Associate Director of Admission here at Northwestern University. And prior to that, I ran a scholarship program for Nike at an independent school in Oregon, Catlin Gable. And before that, I was a financial aid and admission officer at Harvard College, and also served in the United States Navy as a naval officer for about 10 years. So that's a little bit about me. Quinton, let's hear about you.
Sure. So I am Quinton Sprull, as Chad said. I have been, for the most part, a financial aid officer for probably about 6 years. And I'm now happy to be a part of the admissions team, where, of course, financial aid is certainly part of the calculation there. I'm also an alum of Northwestern, so we're sitting here today, and we're proud to continue to educate everyone who's watching, not just about Northwestern and its specifics of financial aid, but how you can navigate the financial aid process at large, no matter where you're going.
Yeah, and so we are, once again, about 6 feet, maybe 7 feet apart from one another, given the time that we're filming this, and hope that everybody is staying safe out there. So let's get into it. We're going to start here with a couple philosophical underpinnings of what financial aid is. And so the first two terms I want to introduce as vocabulary words that we'll talk about a little bit would be need-based and need-blind. So when you hear the word need-blind, what does that mean in terms of financial aid philosophy?
Right. So the way students should think about it is need blind, they should associate it with an admissions policy. So need blind means that the admissions committee is not looking at your family's ability to pay when deciding whether to admit you or not. So they have a completely different staff that's looking at everything related to money. So that means that you have, I would say, probably a greater chance of getting admitted, because that school has made a commitment to admit you based purely off of your merit, if you will, of being able to be a great student at that school, regardless of need. Hence, need blind. That's what need blind is.
And I think there's a longer history behind it too. Whereas, in the history of the last 50 years of the United States, students used to be admitted because they had the ability to pay to go to school, and so schools were only admitting students that had that ability to pay. But now, it's some schools with great endowments and the ability to help fund students regardless of their financial background, that's actually taken a 180-degree turn in a way that a lot of highly selective schools are now seeking out students who might not have the ability to pay in order to make sure that they have a lot of socioeconomic diversity on their campus. So there might be this shift from what parents remember as need blind and what students today are thinking of as need blind, and the values that colleges place around that term and how it is interpreted or seemed to have been interpreted. And so I think that's one interesting piece about need blind. Okay, so then let's go to the second term then, need-based. So what does a need-based financial aid program look like?
Need-based financial aid programs could be the best program out there. So need-based means that whatever award you're going to get, whatever financial aid award you're going to get, is going to be based purely on your family's demonstrated need. So that means that when we'll get into the applications a little bit later, but they determine what your family can afford. The difference between the cost of attendance, which can include everything from tuition to room and board to books, personal expenses. The difference between that and your EFC, or your expected family contribution, is what your demonstrated need is. And so when a school meets full need, that means that they cover the full difference between that cost of attendance and EFC.
Yep. And so Quinton hit a bunch of vocabulary words in there. We're kind of putting the cart in front of the horse here. We'll back it up for a second, because one of the difficulties around financial aid, I think, for families coming to this process the first time, is the barriers to entry, which is some of this jargon and some of these vocabulary words that we throw around. And so what we're going to do right now is break down the three biggest vocabulary words that are associated with financial aid. And so the first vocabulary word I want to hit is FAFSA. So FAFSA, F-A-F-S-A, and that stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. And so the FAFSA it's a product put out by the Department of Education. And so it's free to fill out for any family, and it is going to be a document that mom and dad can sit down with their 1040 tax return and be able to fill out to be eligible for certain types of federal aid. Now, public schools generally use the FAFSA, okay? And then private schools also will use the FAFSA, but also a second product that is put out by the College Board, and it is called the CSS Profile, Collegiate Scholarship Search Profile. And so the FAFSA tends to give you more information from income, and the CSS Profile tends to give you more information from a family's assets. And when you put those two together, you end up with the third big vocabulary jargon piece that we'll use here, which is EFC, expected family contribution. So expected family contribution is what a family can be expected to pay for 1 year for the number, however many students they have in undergraduate study. So if you have twins, you know, your EFC should be relatively similar to if you have 3 students in school as a first-year student, a sophomore, and a senior, or just a single student in school. And so it is a family contribution for the number of students that you have together. But let's back up a little bit. Is there anything you might want to add about FAFSA and about CSS Profile? About thinking about those?
FAFSA is the easiest application to complete. So complete it as early as possible, particularly depending on which state you're in, because some of the states have an early application sort of incentive. So if you apply early to the FAFSA, or you complete the FAFSA early, you may be eligible for some state aid. We'll talk about the kinds of aids later, but you may be eligible for additional financial aid sources if you complete the application early. But regardless, complete it. You have to complete it every single year. So it's a renewable application where you have to complete it every year in order to qualify for additional aid. But it's super easy to complete. Complete it with your family. If you're an independent student, which might be a handful of you guys out there that are independent students, it walks you through the process of what that means and if you qualify, if you identify as an independent student. But regardless, super easy process. Complete it. It's your gateway to get tons of federal aid, whether that be grants, loans, scholarships.
Okay, and another change that happened a few years ago was that makes it easier for families, and this is going to get a little confusing. We'll try and keep it as simple as possible, is that you now are able to use your prior year's tax information as opposed to your prior year. So what does that mean? So if you're a family and you're applying for aid for the 2021-2022 school year, which is next year, you can actually be using the tax information that mom and dad supposedly completed on April 15th of 2020 with 2019 info. So your information might be trailing by 2 years for the FAFSA and for the CSS Profile, but that's okay because what you can still do is if you get to the point where you have a financial aid offer from a school that you think you want to attend, but your financial aid information has changed, or your parents' income, you've had a significant change in income or assets, you're able to update that information with the school, and your financial aid award can be adjusted in many cases. And so the biggest thing and the biggest piece of advice we can give you through any of this is, you know, if you're enrolled at a school or if you've chosen a school and you're about to enroll, that call the financial aid office, reach out to the financial aid office if you have a material change in your financial circumstances to see how they might be able to help out. Schools are able to do more than you might think possible. And it all depends, you know, on the school's ability to help their students out.
Yep.
Okay. CSS Profile, I know we hit in there. And then, you know, a lot of families in the United States come from families that mom and dad may be divorced, mom may be divorced. We don't know what the situation is. And so when families come from you know, mixed backgrounds of parents and the thing and the like, they can complete something called an NCP profile. And so NCP stands for non-custodial parent. So even if you only live with one parent, the other parent, in many situations, they're going to ask for their financial information. Some schools take it into account, some schools don't, and it's hard to make blanket assertions about which schools are going to ask which family members to contribute to your education. So any more advice about NCP profile?
Don't be scared of it. I think that's the advice for parents and students out there. Don't be scared of completing the NCP. You might have tons of information from the non-custodial parent. You may not. The point is that many institutions, they have to gather that information in order to consider you for additional scholarship or any aid. So complete it to the best of your ability. If you have any questions, as Chad alluded to earlier, definitely contact that particular school's financial aid office. They really aren't trying to make it difficult for you. They're just trying to ensure that they have all the pieces of the puzzle to provide you the best financial aid package possible.
Okay. Yep. So let's talk about the types of aid now. And we can break this down into two basic types of aid. There's need-based aid, and there are several types of that we're going to hit, and then merit-based aid. So let's start with need-based aid. And we have scholarships, grants, work, study, and loans. And then loans can be even broken down further. So is there a difference between a scholarship and a grant?
No. It's free money.
Yeah.
So no,
Yeah.
it's called different things. Grants typically are coming from a governmental source. So it's a state or a city or a federal grant. But scholarships, they could be used within those federal government sources as well. But the key thing to remember, whenever you see scholarship or grant, it's free money.
You do not have to pay it back.
No.
That in any of these senses. So you hear the word scholarship or grant, you don't have to pay it back. So then the next part of a student's financial aid package, work study. So how does work study kind of operate on a lot of campuses?
A lot of folks get confused about work study.
Yep.
The good thing to know about work study is that that is money that you earn, or at least money that you have the potential to earn. So you might see a work study award in your financial aid award letter, and that just simply means you're not going to be getting a check for, let's say, $2,300 for the academic year. What it means is that you are then able to work on campus at an on-campus organization and get paid up to $2,300 over the course of that, of that academic year. And just so you know, the behind-the-scenes stuff, work study is an advantage to employers because they only pay 20% of the wages, versus the other 80% is being paid by the federal government. So it's a great way to earn money, to learn something. I was a work study student in the financial aid office when I was a student at the university. So it's a great way to just get extra income to pay whatever expenses you need to pay. And that could be whatever. It could be your personal expenses. You want to go buy pizza. You want to help cover your books or your tuition, whatever you want to. That allotment is for you to earn and spend it as you need to.
Yep, that's the big thing about work study. So then the next piece are loans.
Yep.
And so we have two basic types of loans that then can be divided down from there. So the first kind of loan would be a student loan. And so there are a couple different kinds of student loans. And here's another term that parents and students may hear thrown around is Stafford. Okay, so Senator Stafford was a Vermont Republican a long time ago in the 60s, and this program was named after him. So the federal government will guarantee some loans to students, and so that's called a subsidized loan, where the federal government is going to pay the interest while you're in school. So if you take out a loan for $3,500 for a year, while you're still in school and enrolled, you take that loan out first year. As a sophomore, it's still $3,500. As a junior, it's $3,500. As a senior, it's $3,500. And for 6 months after you graduate, it's still $3,500 before you start accruing interest.
Right.
Okay. So a $3,500 loan is actually a $3,500 loan. But if it's an unsubsidized loan, and there are plenty of student loans that are unsubsidized, that means that it's $3,500 when you take it out, and then it accrues at a rate of interest as a first-year student, and then more interest accrues as a second-year student. And so a $3,500 loan might be several $100s more by the time you graduate.
Correct.
And so you have to be aware of what type of loan you have. A subsidized or an unsubsidized are the biggest differences between loans. So that's a student loan. The most popular subsidized loan that's federally guaranteed is Stafford. And then there are parent loans as well. So we have there are subsidized and unsubsidized. Plus loan is one of them. Any other big differences that you can think of between student loans and parent loans?
The big difference is, as implied by the name, the student loan is in your name, the student, and it's your responsibility to pay by the time you enter repayment, which is likely 6 months after graduation. And then a parent loan is a loan that's taken out in the name of a parent. on behalf of the students, and it's the parents' responsibility to pay after the student graduates or during, whichever is your choice. Go
A
ahead.
couple other things too I want to think about is interest rates.
Yeah.
So student loan interest rates are always going to be lower than parent loan interest rates. So families can strategize a little bit around that. Rather than taking out a plus loan that might be 6 or 7% interest or even more depending on a parent's credit history, maybe you want to maximize using, debt as a means with the student signing for it, even if the parents might help pay it back to get a better interest
Right.
rate. In this pandemic as well, with the Fed setting interest rates so low, interest rates for student loans are always tied to some type of Federal Reserve language and rate. And so the longer we see this like recession take place in the country, the lower loan rates will stay. And so for some families, financing might be a better option now than trying to liquidate certain mutual funds or stocks or an investment that you may have in order to fund the current cost of education. And so it does help to maybe sit down with a certified financial planner or somebody to think about the best way to pay for education, because we haven't said this before, but in the last 30, 40 years, you have the rate of inflation, and the two things that have risen greater than the rate of inflation that Americans have to pay for is healthcare is the greatest in terms of how quickly it's risen relative to the rate of inflation, and then higher education is the second thing. And if you think that some of these highly priced schools start out at $75,000 or $80,000 a year cost of attendance, next to buying a house, it's the most expensive cost that an American family can have. And so how are you going to pay for that, and what does it look like? And so one thing, let's take a little break here before we get into to some merit aid, and just talk a little bit about the sticker price of a college. There's not really a great place to stick this in, but we'll stick it in here before the end. And so tell me a little bit about why a public school that costs $30,000 a year for a middle-class family might cost more than a private school that costs $75,000 a year for a middle-class family.
Absolutely. Short answer is it depends on how much the school, what additional sources of aid the school can offer. I want to touch on your segue briefly of loans. So the reason we're doing this is because we want to inform all the students out there and the parents. As it relates to loans, I say this with an asterisk, but don't be afraid of them. The point is to educate yourself. There are different kinds of loans that carry different repayment terms, different interest rates, student borrower versus parent borrower. Point is to educate yourself to choose the best option for you and your family. That being said, do the same through the college search process and understanding their financial aid policies. So it varies depending on the school. So just because, let's say, a school has a lower overall cost, so that's $30,000 at a public school versus the $50,000 at a private school, it's important to look at a number of things that we're just talking about. Look at your EFC, what you're expected to pay every single year, what proportion of your award is scholarships versus loans, because then eventually you'll have to determine what are you actually paying out of pocket every single year. It's likely, it could be the case that at a public school they may have less scholarship or grant monies to award. So therefore, you might have an award package that has more loans in it, which means that you'll have to pay back more. Whereas at a different school that has a higher scholarship policy or bucket, I'm losing my words right now, then that means that you would actually be paying back less over that 4 years. It could be zero or it just could be less. So it's important to look at the distinction between what is your financial aid award looking like, and don't allow your the sticker price, so the dollar sign in front of the cost of attendance, to scare you away, because the aid is actually what matters.
Yep. Okay. So let's hit merit-based aid.
Yep.
Okay. And so this is a different kind of aid, and it can come in a variety of means and methods as well. So you could have scholarship and grant for merit aid, and you could also have and that is a lot of times it's based on your GPA, your SAT, your ACT, an essay you write, an interview that you go on for the public schools presidential scholarship or the chancellor's scholarship at a school. It could also be based on your ability to play an instrument, your ability to participate in an athletic event. And so there's athletic aid, there may be music aid, there may be character-based aid, there could be, just on your GPA and SAT combined.
Right.
And so schools award that in order to bring in great students and to raise their academic profile and to reward students for sometimes the hard work and preparation that they've put into going for college. What else might you want to add just about merit-based aid and thinking about schools?
A good thing to keep in mind about receiving merit-based aid is to determine whether or not it's renewable, or understand the conditions of keeping that merit-based scholarship. Oftentimes, or I should say at least it's not unusual, to see you as a first-year student being awarded a number of merit-based scholarships, or even just one merit-based scholarship. But it's important to know that most of the time, your college career is going to last 4 years. So how are you going to pay for year 3, 4, and 5? Well, not 5, 2, 3, and 4. So be sure to do the work to figure out what conditions are attached to that scholarship. So it could be maintaining a certain GPA year over year, or continuing to stay in a particular sport or area of academic concentration. And then step 2 is that scholarship renewable. It's great if it is renewable. That means that you don't have to really be concerned about your financial aid awards changing substantially from year to year. If it's not renewable, then you just have to, the parents and your students, you have to determine whether or not it's advantageous to sort of front load sort of the low debt or low burden of your education in your first year or second year, whatever, and then just recognizing that in subsequent years you might be actually paying more because the scholarships aren't available.
Yeah. Okay. Let's switch gears once again and hit one of these terms that I think people hear a lot about, and colleges use it in a really shorthand way. Without sometimes discussing the philosophical underpinnings of it. Pell. Okay, so what does Pell mean? And let's talk a little bit about Pell. So Pell, once again, just like we had mentioned, Stafford is a federal loan program named after a senator. The same thing with Pell. So it's a federal grant program named after a senator, and it's reauthorized through the Higher Education Act every several years. But what Pell has come to mean a lot of times is, when it was first authorized, the history of it is it was going to be the primary basis for a lot of low-income students to attend school. Okay? But now, as once again we had mentioned before, the rate that higher education has outpaced inflation, it's no longer the primary means or grant means for a student to attend a school.
Right.
But what it has come to be known in terms of colleges is it's a shorthand way of saying how many low-income students do we have enrolled as a school, or does School X have enrolled as a school? And it's not a perfect method for doing that, but it is the popular method for trying to show or to demonstrate a certain socioeconomic diversity on
Absolutely.
campus. So Pell in general is it's calculated from your FAFSA, okay? And so it takes several factors into account to calculate if you're going to be eligible for this grant, okay? And so it's going to take your parents' income. It's going to take the number of people in your family. It's going to take the number of students in school. And it's looking at a variety of different factors, and it is a complicated equation to figure out if you qualify for Pell. But in general, families of a size of about 4 that make less than $50,000 of income generally qualify for a Pell Grant. And a Pell Grant, it changes every year. The formula, the equation, the amount that you can earn change based on what the federal government decides and authorizes through Congress. And so in general, it's worth about $5,000 to $5,500 a year if you maximize the amount of Pell Grant you're eligible for. And so a lot of times those schools will use the number of students who qualify for a Pell Grant to demonstrate their socioeconomic diversity. What else would you want to share about Pell and about thinking about Pell?
Yeah. One is just to simply know that you might see it in your financial aid award, and that just means that you qualify. Again, it's really intended to help those families that are of the lower income bracket, as Chad said, 50,000 or less, and helping them sort of meet that gap or fulfill that need, as we talked about earlier. It could be up to $6,400 a year. If you end up getting awarded less than that, that simply means that that's what the calculation determined. It doesn't mean that, oh, I heard that I'm supposed to get $6,400. Where's my $6,400? That's not how it works. It's a calculation, and it's free money. So remember, Pell grant, and you could get it every single year.
Yep.
Yep.
And so, there was before Pell, it was hard to, and even in the last 10 or 15 years, schools are very worried about what they look like socioeconomically in terms of diversity, or how to measure it, and how to see if a school is enrolling, a diverse class. And this is one of those methods that schools will use to do that. So let's get to, I think, the last piece that we want to talk about here, and it's another shorthand term, net price calculator. Okay.
Yeah.
And so, net price calculator was required by the Department of Education in the last 10 years or so, that every school in the United States have a method on the homepage of their financial aid office website in order to calculate how much is going to be asked of a student and their family to contribute to school each year. And so net price calculators in general should be quite easy to use. Some schools will use a calculator. It's only a few questions. Northwestern's in particular, we should, if you have your parents' tax forms, it should take you less than 10 minutes. And what is the result of using a net price calculator, and why should families use this on each school that they're considering?
The federal government has been very intentional over the last decade or so of ensuring that not only that the calculator is available, but that it's useful. We, for instance, at Northwestern, we've been very intentional of working with our financial aid committee and sort of and programming, if you will, the calculator, so that depending on what information you put in, you're able to get, and should be the case for any calculator that you use, you should be able to get a fairly accurate estimate of what your contribution or what your aid may look like year over year at that particular school. It's important that it's only as accurate as the information that you put in. Absolutely work with your parents and get them to use the information from their tax returns or their tax filings. And again, it's a great tool to use if you're concerned about sticker prices. We noted before, go onto those calculators on the site there, complete it to your best of your ability, and that'll give you a good idea as to what it may look for you and your affordability at that particular school.
Yeah, and I think the federal government's intentions here were to try and get beyond sticker price in a way, and to try and get beyond some of the jargon that we've tried to break down. NCP, CSS, FAFSA, EFC, all these vocabulary words, to try and get at the truth of how much will it cost me to go to school X.
Correct.
And so, and I will say in most situations, it's going to be a conservative estimate, and it should be. And it's one of these things that if you're one of these savvier students and you're trying to figure out, is early action right for me? Is early decision right for me? You may be doing that without knowing what your actual financial aid package from a school will be. And therefore, the net price calculator is going to help assuage some fears that mom and dad may have about what is this school actually going to cost me. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways is, I came from a rural low-income family, and it's like, if I would mention a school, the first thing my mom or my dad would say, well, how much does it cost?
Right.
And I remember by the time, I graduated from college and my sister's going to college, I had to shift that thinking for my dad especially, and say, Dad, it's not how much does the school cost, it's how much is it going to cost us to send my sister to that college. And that's what I want to try and train counselors and students to help educate parents on is not what does it cost, how much will it cost us?
Absolutely.
Because that answer is going to be different at every school regardless of the sticker price. And we want to wrap up here a little bit. Is there any other advice that you might want to give out in closing, just about the financial aid process?
I would echo exactly what you were saying in terms of the sticker price. Don't limit your college search process based off of the cost of attendance. Really do the work of looking at those calculators, seeing what kind of scholarships are available, renewable scholarships, et cetera, to determine what's affordable to you. And the second thing is, as we hope we've tried to illuminate, there's a lot of jargon here, but the process is not to confuse you. The process is to help you get the best financial aid award that's best for you and your family. So there's tons of aid out there. Don't get confused by, oh, am I going to get loans or scholarships, or is it need-based? The key thing to note is that there's tons of aid out there for you, and it varies from school to school. And do the work of using that calculator, asking the questions from the financial aid committee to determine what is best for in terms of affordability and what it costs you and your family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so once again, it's just like the backbone and the structure of, I think, the 4 pieces about how you finance a college education will be the parent contribution,
Yep.
scholarships or grant, which can be either need-based or merit-based, okay, loans, and work study. Those are kind of the 4 basic pieces that help you fill, that to come up with that, the cost of attendance are those 4 ways. And I know, coming from a low-income family, I was afraid of debt.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of families who come, who are in low-income situations are afraid of taking on debt. And I understand that about, are we going to be able to pay this back? And you do want to be very responsible and think about how much debt you're taking on as a student. But the difference between what a student with a high school diploma on average earns over a career versus somebody with a bachelor's degree is more than $1 million. Okay, and if you're going to take on $3,000 or $4,000 a year of debt in order to complete that bachelor degree, that might be worth $1 million more on average in America in income over a 30, 40, 50-year period, it's probably worth it, okay? And given where we are now, interest rates are absolutely historically low, but try and educate yourself about what are the best and best loan rates and take anything subsidized before unsubsidized.
Absolutely.
Maybe, take a student loan as opposed to a parent loan if you're able to do that and you feel comfortable doing that. But there are a lot of different schools out there, public and private, and they all have different amounts of endowment and different ways to finance college educations. And so there is no one formula to do this, and that's what you have to do is try and educate yourself as much and ask lots of questions of the financial aid office that you end up working with as a student wherever you enroll.
Right.
And so, yeah, I want to wrap it up here, I think, and I just want to say, Quinton, thank you for helping me out a little bit with this, and hopefully moms and dads and students and counselors will find this useful. So, thank you.
Thanks.